Well, quite a lot. I mean, there is historical precedent. It has happened before that someone who was a runner-up has gone on to win in the runoff, but it still is an uphill struggle for Nicolas Sarkozy. And really, his team wanted a win tonight to give them a little bit of momentum because all the polls had been pretty troublesome for them for weeks, if not months by now. So this is going to be disappointing. There's no doubt about it. But I think the most important thing to say now is there is no president. There could have been a president if one of them had got over 50%. That is now out the window if these exit polls are to be believed. And so 8 candidates now exit, 2 remaining, and a fortnight to do some horse trading now to try and get the supporters of some of those that have dropped out to back them. So how difficult is that going to be? Well, someone who knows this process very well is Bruno Bernard, political consultant who worked for the UMP party, which is President Sarkozy's party. So Bruno, how disappointing is this for Nicolas Sarkozy?
It's very disappointing because Sarkozy's team has hoped for him to get in the lead, very much like what happened in 2007 when he exited with nearly 30%. So yes, it's a big disappointment. 3 points is a very important margin to overcome in only 2 weeks.
Okay, well, where's he going to get it from? One would think Marine Le Pen and the Front National, that seems to have done really well, much better than many people had predicted. Could she hold the key for Sarkozy?
She will definitely hold the key for Sarkozy, as you said. You can expect Sarkozy to address many issues such as immigration, security, important for Marine Le Pen's voters. But you can't expect any calls from Marine Le Pen on the National Front to vote for Sarkozy in the second round.
Well, she won't give a public endorsement like we see in US presidential elections, for example?
No, it's very unlikely because Marine Le Pen is counting on the fact that UMP voters will go back to her after this election, and since they'll be competing for the same turf with the UMP, she hopes to make some significant gains after Sarkozy is defeated.
It's getting quite complicated, isn't it? So basically, the supporters say of Front National, we're now going to see in the second in the runoff whether they stay at home, because they're not going to vote for a socialist, are they? So if they go into the polling booth, you can assume it's going to be for Nicolas Sarkozy. So it's the get out the vote that he's got to try and get the Front National people to go into the booth and support him.
Exactly. I think you can expect him to use some sort of scare tactics, in the sense that Marine Le Pen voters are very interested in immigration and foreigners vote in local elections. So Nicolas Sarkozy is likely to repeat and address that issue, saying that François Hollande favors foreigners to be able to vote in local elections, whereas he opposes that thing.
Okay, well, we will see. It's going to be an interesting fortnight. A lot of political horse trading there, Mark, that's going to be going on behind closed doors. Could it be an offer of a cabinet position, perhaps, or maybe moving to the left or moving to the right? There's a lot to play for now.
Robert sent support for Le Pen.
That's right, and there is, of course, now a lot of analysis as to whether people, when they were approached by polling companies, still have that issue about not wanting to admit that they would vote for a party that is seen by some as racist. And as you were discussing there, Marine Le Pen has tried to change the image of the party away from one of being just purely a single-issue party on anti-immigration, but moving to become an anti-Euro party and a protectionist party. And it seems that she's achieved some success. Remember, her father got into the runoff. So let's talk to Bruno Bernard. He obviously did well then, back in 2002. What were his figures then? Just remind us.
About 17%.
So she got 3% more. So this
than her father, yes, she did, which is very impressive, considering that Nicolas Sarkozy has had a very right-wing campaign and has tried to address issues important to Le Pen voters, and that has been his strategy from day one. Apparently he wasn't successful. Now we'll have to see whether he can address these issues or he can actually convince Marine Le Pen voters to go out and vote for him the second round.
Well, let's look at that. I mean, the Ipsos polling company, they're saying from their results that 45% would back Sarkozy. That's still probably not as much as the Sarkozy team would like.
No, that's not enough. Sarkozy will need at least 2/3 of Marine Le Pen's vote in order to be elected. But the question is here, do the people who voted for Marine Le Pen, were they in favor of Marine Le Pen or were they anti-Nicolas Sarkozy? And that's something that we'll see in 2 weeks now.
Because some people say that the first vote, people think, well, it's not really going to matter, because we're going to have a second chance. So you're voting for someone you don't want in the first round and then for someone you do want in the second round. Would that be fair?
It's quite fair, but when given a choice of two people, there's also a process of elimination. So the question is the National Front voters interested in having 5 more years of Nicolas Sarkozy and his right-wing leaning policies, or do they want to get rid of him and have instead a socialist president with maybe some communist ministers?
Now let's look a little at Francois Hollande, because he obviously has to attract some from the left. Now Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who was quite a fascinating candidate, in terms of actually setting this campaign on fire, he was the only one who really had those big rallies that got people talking. Yet he doesn't seem to have done so well, 11.7%. Why did that fizzle?
Very disappointing figures for Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Apparently, the calls from François Hollande's team and François Hollande himself to vote useful in the first round in order to put François Hollande ahead of Nicolas Sarkozy in the first round has played well for François Hollande to the disadvantage of Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
And so that means in a way that Francois Hollande isn't under pressure now to move to the left over the next 2 weeks on issues such as the fiscal compact that we've heard a lot of discussions about, that he would like to rewrite elements of it and fight against the golden rule of fiscal discipline being put in parties' constitutions. So what happens now?
Very good question. He will have to address issues important to Jean-Luc Mélenchon's voters, but he will also have to go after the centrist vote, the more moderate voters in France who voted for François Bayrou. And he will also have to attract right-wing voters, the people who are, well, a bit disappointed by Nicolas Sarkozy and his 5 years presidency. But in order to win, François Hollande will also have to gain some of the votes from Marine Le Pen.
What is it about Nicolas Sarkozy? He was elected with a landslide 5 years ago. He steered France through economic troubles. Okay, some may say that he didn't do it particularly successfully, France losing its AAA ratings from the Standard & Poor's agency. But is it his personality? Is that what has cost him today's election?
Well, there are two things. There's a bit of disillusion and disenchantment with Nicolas Sarkozy because he hasn't delivered what he promised in 2007, especially when it comes to the purchasing power of French people.
So he made a big play saying, I will put more money in your pockets if I succeed. And he did succeed, and they didn't get it.
No, well, people don't see it that way. Also, unemployment figures have risen a lot, and when you remember what he said in 2007, he promised that unemployment would be around 5%. It's now close to 10%. But it's, as you said, it's also about his personality. He's definitely not your typical French president, and many people in France never really liked him as a president. They liked him as a minister, but not as a president.
And he was a minister, a finance minister and an interior minister as well. And as we talk, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who we were just discussing from the far left, who had some extraordinary policies, including a 100% income tax on anyone over 300,000. Well, he's talking now. So we were talking about horse trading, in terms of these two frontrunners now having to appeal to those supporters who were left without a candidate. Are we talking about backroom deals? If you tell your supporters support me, I'll give you a job in the cabinet, or I will move more of my policies over to your sympathy. What happens now?
There will be some negotiation, of course. You have to remember that Jean-Luc Mélenchon is supported by the Communist Party in France, and the Communist Party is very interesting in constituencies and National Assembly seats. In order to have as much as they can. So they'll be negotiating quite hardly with François Hollande in order to get as many seats as they can. But that's not something likely to happen on the right, because actually Nicolas Sarkozy doesn't have anyone to negotiate with.
And we've got to remember, Mark, that of course this is just the presidential race. Once the president is actually finally elected in 2 weeks' time, he then picks a prime minister, and that prime minister then calls a general election. So the whole political landscape in France is going to be changing over the next few weeks and months.
Robert, thank you for that. Let's have a listen now to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, polling between than her father ever achieved by, what, some 3%?
That's right, Jean-Marie Le Pen, her father, who ended up in the runoff in 2002, knocking out Lionel Jospin and facing off with Jacques Chirac. Yeah, didn't do as well as his daughter, and yet he ended up in the runoff. But he's just been talking on French television, on FR2, and he said, unsurprisingly, he was very pleased with the result. And this is a quote from him: "I handed the baton to my daughter, and she has run faster, I think." So let's dig in again to the Front National with Bruno Bernard, political consultant. So does this mean then, in effect, that we cannot make this conclusion that François Hollande has done this well so far, that therefore it's an automatic win for him in the next round? It matters, the National Front, doesn't it?
It does a lot, because the question is, will Nicolas Sarkozy convince enough National Front voters to get out and vote for him? That's the main question, and he's actually better equipped than François Hollande to do so.
And of course, there is not exactly a personal closeness between Marine Le Pen and Nicolas Sarkozy either.
No, yeah.
They're not particularly good friends, are they?
I don't think they're friends at all. I don't even know if they know each other, actually.
So this is not something that, say, in an American election, two primary rivals that may have been slugging it out for a few months, can sort out over a beer.
No, definitely. They're very from two opposite sides of the political spectrum here in France.
On the subject of the side of the political spectrum, Eva Joly, who was from the Ecology Party, she unsurprisingly has been talking and has supported Hollande. Anything to be read from that?
No, it was expected. I mean, the Socialist Party and the Greens have a deal for 60 seats in order to be won by the Greens because of that deal, that electoral deal between the two left-wing parties. So there's no surprise there.
So some deals have been stitched up already in advance of this.
Yes, they have, and it's interesting. It will be interesting to watch whether the socialists or some socialists might renegade on that deal, because with only 2%, I don't think that Eva Joly and the Greens are strong enough to see that deal through.
Now, there's one elephant in the room in these discussions, if you'll forgive me for saying that, and that's Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the man who was the head of the Socialist Party, had a few difficulties in New York, is now implicated in a prostitution scandal, which he denies any involvement in. But wasn't he the man who was going to be France's next president, and how have his problems affected this race?
Oh, definitely. He was seen as the next president without even an election, and François Hollande was second. That's why François Hollande started his campaign very early, and by a certain turn of event, he became number one. But that's also why he's often seen as a candidate by default, because Strauss-Kahn has not been able to join the race.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Bruno. And we saw Dominique Strauss-Kahn voting this morning in just outside Paris. His wife, Anne Sinclair, wasn't with him. She is actually presenting election coverage tonight on a French news channel. So Dominique Strauss-Kahn, I'm sure there'll be lots of analysis of how his personal difficulties have played out.
So reminding us, Robert, it's not just the runoff as well. There's going to be a televised presidential debate to address all these topics.
That's right. We understand that President Sarkozy left Élysée Palace probably about 5-6 minutes ago, so he should be here relatively shortly. And I'm with Bruno Bernard, a political consultant who knows about the power plays that are going to be happening now, and also the significant moments in the next 2 weeks. One of them, as you say, is that televised debate. Remind us of the day that it's on, and also what we can divine from what Hollande said there as to what to expect when the two men meet together.
It should be held on May 3rd or May 2nd, so 3 days before the actual second round. I think what we can expect is that Monsieur Hollande will play will play the card as the unifier of the French against what he expects a very aggressive Sarkozy, who's playing for his political life right now.
Because what happened last time round, Sarkozy was way ahead of the polls. This is much closer, so it's probably going to be a bit more brutal. Do you think?
Yes, he will have to. He will have to go after François Hollande. He will have to show the contradiction of François Hollande. Maybe even hint the fact that.
Presidential debate to address all these topics.
That's right. We understand that President Sarkozy left Élysée Palace probably about 5-6 minutes ago, so he should be here relatively shortly. And I'm with Bruno, a political consultant who knows about the power plays that are going to be happening now, and also the significant moments in the next 2 weeks. One of them, as you say, is that televised debate. Remind us of the day that it's on, and also what we can divine from what Hollande said there as to what to expect when the two men meet together.
It should be held on May 3rd or May 2nd, so 3 days before the actual second round. I think what we can expect is that Monsieur Hollande will play the card as the unifier of the French against what he expects a very aggressive Sarkozy, who's playing for his political life right now.
Because what happened last time round, Sarkozy was way ahead of the polls. This is much closer, so it's probably going to be a bit more brutal. Do you think?
Yes, he will have to. He will have to go after François Hollande. He will have to show the contradiction of François Hollande. Maybe even hint the fact that he's not presidential enough to be the next leader of France. And he will also have to show Marine Le Pen voters that he's more credible or closer as a candidate for them than François Hollande is, or to at least energize them to go out and vote for him.
On the subject of energizing, it's starting to get a little bit friskier here, but it could just be another cabinet member. We've had a procession of them, Mark, behind us with a little swarm of reporters and cameras around them as they entered the building, but no sign of the incumbent just yet, although we do know he's on his way.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take you back inside because